To just roll right through my presentation on the Regional Municipal Comprehensive Review and into
You just put your microphone down.
into Mike's update, and then we're happy to answer any questions. So I am here with Mike this morning to update you on sort of three important regional initiatives: the Municipal Comprehensive Review, where we're at with servicing capacity assignment. And then Mike's going to talk to you about the Upper York Sewage Solution. And of course, we're going to talk about these initiatives, all as they relate to East Gwillimbury. Oh, I know not news to you, but in May of last year, the province introduced three new plans. And the region was, before the province began the review, we were in the middle of our 2014 Municipal Comprehensive Review. When the province announced they were reviewing their plans, we paused our comprehensive review. So we have now restarted that. Because of the extent of the change to the provincial plans, particularly the growth plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe, it is basically a restart. The province has changed a lot of the targets. They've given us they're a lot more specific in their directions. And overall, they've sort of downloaded more responsibility to the region, and they've also kind of uploaded some stuff from local municipalities to the region. So I just want to, over the next few slides, before I get into where we're at with the comprehensive review, highlight some of those changes that are significant to the Regional Municipal Comprehensive Review. But before I do that, I just want to talk a little bit about geography. Mayor Haxton's going to be very familiar with this slide. We kind of ground any of our growth presentations at the region in this slide. So just for context, the dark pink color is what we define through the provincial plan as York Region's built-up area. The light pink is the designated greenfield area. And the line between the dark and the light pink is the provincially defined built boundary. And that becomes important when we get into some of the intensification targets. And then, of course, we have our green areas that are Greenbelt and Oak Ridges Moraine. So one of these significant changes in the new growth plan is an increase in the intensification targets. That's the amount of annual growth at the regional level that has to be accommodated within that already built up area, so inside the built boundary. So the 2006 plan, and now our regional official plan, calls for 40% of annual growth to be accommodated in that dark pink area. The province has now, with the 2017 plans, increased that to 50%. And ultimately 60%. But the 60% doesn't apply until to growth between only 2031 and 41. So it's a phased-in increase in the intensification target. The 40% remains until we finish this municipal comprehensive review we have underway. Also new in the 2017 plans is the elevated importance of major transit station areas. So we'll be looking at these as part of our regional intensification strategy, working very closely with our local municipal partners. Major transit station areas are those stops and stations along existing and future higher order transit corridors. So in East Gwillimbury, think about your GO station at Green Lane. So we're required at the regional level now to delineate the boundaries around these major transit station areas and set minimum densities. So we're going to be doing that in partnership with our local municipalities. And we've already had a couple of meetings with your planning staff, of course. Another change in density targets affects the greenfield, designated greenfield areas. So if you think back to that urban structure slide, that's the light pink area. So currently, previously, the 2006 plan required a minimum density of 50 residents and jobs combined per hectare. So in the regional official plan, we set a minimum of 70 residents and jobs combined per hectare for our new community areas, And we had to do that to achieve the 50 density target over the whole designated greenfield area. In the 2017 provincial plans, that density minimum is increased to 60, and that 60 does exclude employment lands. So we're not too worried about our ability to achieve that new target. But then the new plan ups that density target to 80, and that's over, again, phased in, so that 80 residents and jobs combined density target will only apply to any additional urban expansions lands that we add through this municipal comprehensive review. So just to provide clarification, in East Gwillimbury Local 1, it's going to remain subject to our current regional official plan density target of 70 residents and jobs combined per hectare. And just for interest's sake, I included some photographs of what does this 80 look like. If you're familiar with Cornell in the city of Markham, it's actually building out at a density of 85 residents and jobs combined per hectare. So at that density, you get a variety of built form in your housing. You get some mid-rise, you get townhouses, but there's still lots of room for single-family dwellings. Other important areas that the province has changed with respect to regional involvement is on employment lands. We are now required at the regional level to designate employment lands in our official plan. Previously, we just designated urban. And we left the delineation of residential and employment up to our local municipalities. The province is now saying, no, upper tier municipalities, you have to actually designate the employment lands, and that's including prime employment and other kinds of employment lands. We also have to identify opportunities for employment intensification and set minimum density targets on employment lands. Thank you, Mike. And then sort of just to finish off the provincial plan overview, there's other key policy areas that we'll be concentrating on. We have to do a housing strategy and look at increasing our affordable housing, ownership and rental. We have to coordinate, and for York Region, we've always done this, so it's not new, but it's not new to us, but it is specified in more detail in the 2017 provincial plan, and that's planning for infrastructure coordinated with land use. And, sorry, climate change also plays a huge role in the 2017 plan. So at the regional level, we did bring a report in November outlining the development of a climate change action plan and a community energy plan. Province is also being more specific in some of the land use areas. So we commented in September on the provincially proposed natural heritage system and agricultural system, and we're waiting for those to become final through the province. In December, the province posted on the EBR draft land needs assessment methodology. So we're reviewing that now, and that's going to be key to how we do our land budget work in the regional municipal comprehensive review. This slide just summarizes all the background studies and work we have to do. Much of this work is already underway, and I've spoken to those pieces of the work that are significant and or new to the regional municipal comprehensive review. Of course, our review has a huge consultation component. Key to completing the municipal comprehensive review is collaboration with our local municipalities. We've already had 2 meetings. We've set up working groups. We anticipate at least quarterly meetings with planning staff from across the region. We'll probably have workshops with our council. We're open to coming to local councils as we are today at request. And public consultation, we're bringing a report forward in actually this month, next week. We have a report on the MCR consultation program. So I'm just going to finish up the MCR outline with our key milestones. We you see the arrow, the We Are Here arrow. Really 2018 is kind of the year of internal consultation with other departments, consultation with local municipal staff, and getting all those background studies and all that background work well underway. And we'll work through to a draft growth management sort of directions report for regional council endorsement in 2019, a draft regional official plan, or official plan amendment. We haven't quite figured out which it's going to be yet. Later in 2019, with the hope of adoption in 2020. We anticipate at least 2 touch points annually with regional council. So our immediate next steps are commenting on that EBR posting of the provincial land needs assessment methodology. We'll continue those regular local municipal meetings I spoke of. You can see where the reports we brought forward in 2017, and then we also have a list of reports we anticipate for 2018 and 19. So I'm just going to move right into the second part of the presentation, which is a review of servicing capacity assignments. And this slide is right out of a presentation that Commissioner Mahoney and I gave to Regional Council last year when we did the 2016 capacity assignments. So there's a little bit of a reminder that we did capacity assignments in 2012 and 2013, and both of those assignments included an outlook as well. Then in September of 2016, we gave a multi-year capacity assignment of 71,838 persons. Now, this is for the YDSS. So there are standalone systems. This is YDSS specific. And I would just note that at that time, that assignment was about 40% higher than the outlook we had provided in 2013. And we are planning to report back in the second quarter of 2018 regarding servicing capacity in East Gwillimbury, Aurora, and Newmarket. And we committed to regional council to do that when we presented this in 2016. The slide is straight out of that 2016 presentation. You can see I've highlighted East Gwillimbury and its 21,000 persons capacity. And I would just remind you that that 21,000 is contingent on the Sustainable Development Incentives Program. So it's really kind of 16,395, or if we take it at 3 persons per unit, we convert it to the 5,465 units with up to 7,000 units based on the bonusing, and that bonusing has to be based on proven results. That's the building of watertight systems and flow monitoring, etc., which is in place now. So what's happened since then? This is my last slide before I turn things over to Mike. You can see the numbers going in to 2015. In 2016, just over 1,600 permits were issued, and in 2017, 945 permits. So that leaves East Gwillimbury with capacity unused of just over 13,000 people and about 4,400 units. So we're going to continue to monitor the capacity and the flows, and together we'll look at some bridging solutions. So we do know, though, there's not a real historic average of permit activity here in East Gwillimbury, and we know it will vary, and that's why we're going to monitor it closely. But I think we were here presenting previously based on 700, average of 700 units a year over time. That would take your capacity out to 2023 or 2024. So with that summary, I'm going to turn it over to Mike. Thank you.
Thank you, Val. I guess my job today is to provide an update on the Upper York Sewage Solution project. Before I do that, I just want to go through some servicing maps. I think this will give you the infrastructure context for the numbers Val just discussed. Talk about the YDSS, the York Durham Sewage System extension into East Gwillimbury, and then how that relates to the numbers we just discussed, and then what the Upper York project will do, and what that servicing scheme looks like in terms of infrastructure. So just on the map here, if you see in the middle of the screen, that's the Newmarket sewage pumping station. Now, everything north of there was constructed as part of the York Durham Sewage System extension into East Gwillimbury. So that goes up through second concession. What you'll see to the north is the Queensville pumping station, which takes flows from Queensville down through second concession. Again, the Holland Landing pumping station was constructed. That moves into the second concession sewage system. And of course, the pumping station to the south is what takes everything down into Newmarket, which flows through Newmarket and Aurora and down through our York Durham sewage system to the Falcon Creek plant. So that is the servicing regime right now. That speaks to the 5465 units that Val spoke to, and with the Sustainable Development Program, up to 7,000 units or 21,000 people. So that infrastructure is in place, it's commissioned, and that is what is providing servicing for the next several years as the development's ongoing in East Gwillimbury right now. So moving to the Upper York project and what that looks like subsequent to completion is to the north of the screen we now have construction of the Water Reclamation Center. So that's the new treatment facility that we've been talking about. So you'll see that the flows that were going south into the York Durham sewage system are now going north to that Water Reclamation Center. So again, the flows from Holland Landing, Sharon, Queensville will be treated at that facility. And of course, the offset creates the capacity in the Newmarket and Aurora system. So the Upper York project isn't just for East Gwillimbury, it's to address capacity concerns or capacity needs in Aurora, Newmarket, and East Gwillimbury. So that's the purpose of the project and how it's moving forward. So just moving to the IEA individual environmental assessment file. I think I was here early in 2017 to talk about it, and we went through the project in detail, and I brought up some of the time constraints that are occurring with the province right now. So as you know, back in 2014, we submitted our final IEA document to the province for approval. We had anticipated an approval coming sometime in 2015, which would then move us into design and move us through the project. It did take a little bit longer for the province to move through that work, so 2015 went by. Into 2016, they filed their government review on the IEA, which basically said, look, this is a good project, we're ready to move forward, and we submitted our final filing for it. Late 2016, all the feedback we were getting was positive, and that we likely have an approval early 2017. And late in 2016, when we got the news about the provincial duty to consult related to First Nations consultation. So that was late in 2016. Now we're beginning of 2018, and that process is still ongoing. At the time, we didn't quite understand from the province what they were required to do to move through this. Initial timelines we talked about were 6 to 8 months, but come late 2017, when a year had gone by and we still didn't have approval, we realized it was taking a bit longer and perhaps more complex than we thought. So we've been working diligently through 2017 on this to try and work with the province to understand it. Again, the duty to consult responsibility lies with the province. It wasn't something to do with the project that we undertook or the IEA that the regions filed. This was something related to the provincial duty. So we've worked with staff to try and understand that, see how they're advancing with the Chippewas of Georgina Island to advance that work. Likewise, we've been meeting a lot with the island to discuss the issues. We've actually started a health impact assessment with Georgina Island to look at, just explain the impacts of this plant to the community on the island and work through that. So that's something we've started to look at through 2017 and been meeting. Our chairman and the mayors of our 3 municipalities have been in contact politically to try and suggest the urgency of this file and understand that there's growth constraints, but also constraints in Newmarket with the force main that's there that has to be twinned as part of this project. So a lot going on for this project, and it's critical that we get it approved as soon as possible. So that's some of the messaging we've been providing back to the ministry during this time period. In line with all that, you know, we've continued to advance this project despite not having approval and not having the conditions that will impact the implementation of our project. We've continued to advance work. You know, we've done property acquisition. We've advanced our designs on the linear and the facility. I mean, we're over 90% now. We're really just waiting for the conditions and some of the technical requirements that might come from that to implement into the design. But other than that, we've moved it right forward. We're doing demonstration projects right now up at our Keswick facility on the membrane technology. Regional Council approved a demonstration program with the Lake Simcoe Conservation Authority to do our phosphorus offset ponds or look at phosphorus offsetting and start to demonstrate some of that technology. So parallel to the IEA, everything is going forward in terms of the design. And so when that approval comes, we are ready to move forward. We just have to get our permits, and, you know, any licensing or environmental requirements that we need to meet, any conditions we need to meet, and then we'd like to move forward as soon as possible with this project. So that being said, there are impacts resulting from this this delay in approval, what we consider to be a delay in approval. When we prepared the 2017 budget, capital budget for the region, it was in late 2016 or mid to late 2016. All the information we had at the time was we'd have an approval early 2017. So that tied very nicely with our committed completion date of 2024. Now we're going into a time period where we're preparing for the 2019 budget. The best information as staff that we can provide in terms of timelines is we've estimated an early 2019 approval. Effectively, that's a 2-year delay in timing from when we had originally anticipated in 2016. So you can see to the top of this screen is the gray schedule, which is what we had anticipated late 2016 in preparing the 2017 budget, which resulted in a 2024 completion. Now, in preparing the 2018 budget, we had to provide new estimates, which is a 2019 approval. Now, you see we put a bracket there in terms of potential approval, meaning if we were to get the approval next week, next month, that could have impacts to bring it forward. But I think based on the climate right now, we're suggesting an early 2019 approval just to inform our budgeting process and where the spending might happen. So what this results in is a 2026 completion of the Water Reclamation Center. So a 2-year difference from what we had programmed in 2016 in our capital program. The good news is it's still programmed in our 10-year plan. We're still committed to the project, and we anticipate with approval, we'll be ready to move forward. You know, the IEA itself was a $25 million expenditure plus. We've invested nearly $70 million now with all the design and pilots and property acquisition and all the work we've been doing. So we continue to be committed to this project, and you know, are going to work closely with the province to bring up approval as soon as possible. So next steps for us in 2018, obviously we're continued dialogue with the ministry on their work with the First Nations, but also their work on finalizing the approval and the conditions. So staff are staying very close to ministry staff on finalizing some of this work and moving that forward. We'll continue to advance design efforts and be prepared for an approval so that when it comes, we'll be ready to go and take advantage of any sort of time benefits that we can gain with an early approval, etc. This month, next week on the 18th, we'll be bringing a report forward to Regional Council, just detailing a lot of what I talked about today. Might provide a little more detail into some of the issues that are ongoing, but it'll also be forwarded to your clerk for EG Council to look at and review. And as Val had commented, there will be an interim capacity report to be brought forward in June 2018. What we'll be looking at there is, I mean, we've talked about the sustainability program for East Gwillimbury, and so what we'll be looking at over the coming years is the monitoring of the success of this system. How well is it working? We've talked about the 65 units available capacity, how that relates to the 7,000 and how we get there, but you know, beyond the 7,000 is the potential for more. So we want to see how successful this program is in terms of the units that are being constructed and the development happening in the community. And you know, we'll be working closely with local staff to make sure that construction is happening properly and that some of these programs are being implemented and or they are being implemented, and the success is being garnered for low flow and flow reduction. Again, some of the other stuff we're doing in the system, and it ties to Aurora Newmarket as well. We're looking at other infrastructure and interim options. Nothing that'll replace the Water Reclamation Center, but other infrastructure possibilities, as well as inflow and infiltration reduction programs to look at reducing flow in the system. So it's going to be all hands on deck in terms of trying to bridge some of the delays that are occurring. We talked about the 2-year delay. You know, is there something we can do that could provide a little additional capacity for a 2-year period, a 1-year period for these 3 municipalities, because they'll become critical. I think with the 3 region-wide, we've always tried to provide some element of years in terms of capacity availability to municipalities. I know Newmarket's quite constrained. They're looking at a few years before they're right out of capacity. Aurora's the same. With yourselves, Val commented on what's available remaining for East Gwillimbury, but obviously the next step is the Upper York project to bring on future capacity. So that concludes my portion of the presentation, and obviously Val's. So we're now available to take any questions that you might have.
Thank you very much. A lot to absorb, and I'm sure that there are questions, but also I would suggest that perhaps there'll be questions later on that we'll be able to put together and send them off to you as well. It's a lot to absorb. So with that, Councillor Persicini.
Very, very informative. A couple of questions. Do we have anything in writing if the government should change power, and the endeavor government should change power? Do we have any guarantee or any kind of thing that this, after all the money that everybody's invested in this project, so we're all concerned about, that we will still get the money, just a matter of time? Do we have any sort of say that we're going to promise you, but we don't know when we're going to give you the money for your budget? Do we have anything sort of, if the government should change power, could affect us? What happens then? That's the only concern I have.
It's a very good question. I'll try to answer it to the best of my ability. Through you, Madam Mayor. So right now with the province and our relationship, actually what's happened, the Minister of Environment and Climate Change right now has actually recused himself from making a decision on this file, and in that basically said, I'm conflicted, being the local MPP, has stepped off this file. So it's basically gone to the Minister of Natural Resources and Forestry to make the decision. So this minister will have to be looking at the file and getting briefed on all the information before a decision can be made. So obviously there's an impact with the coming election and the time that would happen. In terms of the funding for the project, the province isn't funding the project itself. It is being funded by development. Growth does play for growth. So this will be a debt-funded project and recovered through development charges as things go forward. But obviously that can't happen without the province's approval on the file.
That's
So,
what I meant, yeah.
and so we have no certainty around when that approval will come, if and when it will come, and there's definitely no political commitments to an
There's
approval.
nothing in writing.
Nothing in writing. Staff have filed their government review in support of the project. So from a review and technical standpoint, all the pieces are there to advance this project. It's now briefing the new minister and having them make a decision, which will eventually go to cabinet for an approval. So cabinet would have to sit and approve this project.
I think my concern, and I'm sure the community and all the rest of the region should be concerned, is if something does change the government, now you have to start all over again. It's like me changing a bank manager, and all of a sudden I had a relationship, and I started having all kinds of promises. This is going to happen in 2016, 17, 18, and now it's 19. And again, now we have to start all over again, putting all our ducks in order. That's the only thing. Obviously, everybody, not only we will be affected, but everybody will be affected. That was the only concern. Great presentation, Larry. Thank you.
Councillor Young?
Just to piggyback on that a little bit, Madam Mayor, and through you, when we first understood or were made aware that there was going to be an issue with the timing of the Upper York obviously approval had not come through from the province, but it seemed to be more at that time driven by cash flow issue with York Region and not having funding in place to, if they were able to get approval when you thought you were going to get it. From a funding standpoint from York Region, are we past that point now that once we do, or the region does receive the approval from the province, that we have the funds to move forward with the entire project?
Through you, Madam Mayor, the answer to that is yes. Right now, it is programmed in our 10-year capital program. It is programmed in our 2018 budget for the 10-year cycle. So it is there now. I think with approval, we need advancing. Now again, it is debt financed, and it will be recovered through development charges as development progresses. So that is a factor into the overall corporate scenario in terms of our fiscal strategy. But as of 2018, in the budget that we've prepared, it currently sits in the 10-year program for completion in 2026.
And just on that, roughly, I think you've thrown out some of the numbers, but what has York Region committed at this point in time in funding to some of the works that have been done? Obviously, the EA work, the engineering work, but there has been some infrastructure that has been contributed to this project already as well.
Yes, so in fact, all the infrastructure that's been put into place is tied into this overall project. So the 110 million plus of infrastructure put in along second concession, the 3 pumping stations, they all factor into this overall solution. The Upper York project would not be possible without this being implemented. So that major investment has already been put into place and already put in the ground. Then I mentioned the 70 million of non-construction work that's gone into this overall project. It does include some tangible things like demonstration facilities and these kind of things, but a lot of it's gone into the design. This is a major $600 million plus program. So if you factor in engineering to at least 10% of that, it's major investment just to get the design completed and the individual environmental assessment.
Councilor Roy, commenting?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think the funding questions have been answered sufficiently. I guess I'm a little concerned at having spent $70 million so far and not having any approvals in place. I've started to hear a little bit more about this, the force main twinning, and I'm wondering if you could reverse back to the slide and talk a little bit more about what that implies. As I understand it, that there were some redundancies and some work that was done with YDSS in anticipation of UYSS so that flows could go both north and south if there were problems, given sort of some of the directions that were coming from the province about environmental protections and so on. But I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit more about this force main twinning and why it's so important to this project. Please.
No problem. Through you, Madam Mayor. So just a little context here back to the original slide I presented. This is the second slide, which shows the overall solution with the Water Reclamation Center. So to the north of the screen, the red lines are basically showing the infrastructure that's going to the Water Reclamation Center. So that's all constructed in terms of that infrastructure. Obviously now it's going south, like I showed you in the diagram before. It's going to the south. Now, the work in Newmarket, the twinning of the force main, is really tied to redundancy. Right now in Newmarket, so you see the pumping station here in this red line. Right now it's a single force main, so there's only one pipe going down. It's probably the largest of our pumping stations that has a single force main coming out of it. All our other large pumping stations have twin force mains. This was something we inherited from the province back in the 70s in the state that it's in. So as part of this project, it became critical that we advance a twinning of this force main. So it's really tied to system redundancy and resiliency. With all the added pressure from the growth, it becomes even more important to have this twinning and this pipe available to the future. So through the environmental assessment, this was deemed as a critical piece of it. Now, from the region's standpoint, we really feel that this is a separate and different project than the Water Reclamation Center. I mean, the Water Reclamation Center is what's driving the growth. This redundancy piece is a little more urgent in terms of just having that redundancy in the system. So it's something we've called out to the province through 2017, both at the staff level and from our mayors and chairmen to say, hey, this is urgent. We need to get this piece constructed as soon as possible. We can't go on any longer with this single force main. So That's where that force main comes into play. There are small interconnections between the north and the south system. Now, you'll see a provisional connection to YDSS for security built as part of the QHLS project. That's really just security purposes in the future. If you ever need to divert from the north to the south, you could potentially do that. But it's not big enough for a major wholesale supply change or anything like that. Everything from Newmarket south will go to the York sewage system down to our Duffy Creek plant. So that's basically what the force main's for. I think I've answered your question.
Yes, you have. Thank you very much. I guess I've been hearing a lot of that in sort of the chatter around this project and why it had been tied to it. Can you speak to me about the impact or what things look like from a capacity perspective now that YDSS has been commissioned? The capacity in the system to be able to take the lagoons offline has been created, as I understand it. Where do those flows go now, and where will they go in future? Because part of this is the residents have been promised for quite some time that the lagoons will be decommissioned as part of UYSS, and they've been patiently waiting while that clock ticks.
So good question. So this was the original map that I showed you, which is the current servicing strategy. So essentially you have the 3 new pumping stations, 1, 2, 3, and this other black square represents the lagoons that are currently in place. So, and as you know, there was commitments made to tie the lagoons to the Upper York project. There's also some legal implications related to the licensing for that facility and tying that licensing to the future water reclamation center. So that will be the licensing changeover once the water reclamation center is commissioned and why it needs to stay online. So as part of this project, as part of the current servicing scheme, the lagoons are still in service and flows from Hall Landing do go into it. And any growth in Hall Landing will also be diverted into the major trunk on second concession. So all the flows from Queensville, from Sharon, are flowing down through this pipe into Newmarket. So that's where the lagoons are right now. Then with the future commissioning, you'll see that the lagoons are sitting here, Hall Landing lagoons decommissioned, and obviously that the plant comes into play. So the lagoons need to stay in service until the WRC, Water Reclamation Center, is commissioned.
It was my understanding that capacity to decommission these lagoons was created when YDSS was built. So at the moment, we have additional capacity in YDSS to be able to decommission. And that the only reason why they're not decommissioned is that we're waiting for that IEA to be approved so that the certificate of I think it's the certificate can be transferred to the Water Reclamation Center. So at this moment, because YDSS has been commissioned, there is additional capacity in the system to decommission it. Am I incorrect in understanding that?
So through you, Madam Mayor, I think what you're saying is correct. So you're right. Originally, I believe that when the commitments were that when the York sewage system was constructed, it would be an opportunity to take the lagoons out of service. However, with the Upper York Sewage project and when it was defined to occur in the Lake Simcoe watershed, the province came forward and said, you need to maintain the lagoons until this water reclamation center is constructed, so the environmental compliance approval, the license essentially, can be transferred over. So the capacity in the system right now, well, determining what it is from the 5465 to the 7,000 to the plus, it's there right now, but it's being filled up as development's coming on. So the lagoons, for the sake of the region, have to stay online until the Water Reclamation Center is constructed.
I guess where I'm going with that is that there's additional capacity, there are additional units of allocation available to the region to be assigned above and beyond what's already being given out. And I guess my next question will then relate into Ms. Shuttleworth's presentation, which is growth targets and intensification.
So I think your comment is correct in that if the lagoons aren't going into the York-Durham sewage system, obviously there's an offset there. I wouldn't call it additional capacity because there is constraints within Aurora, Newmarket, and East Gwillimbury now in terms of capacity. So but having it not flow to the York Durham sewage system does create an offset, so that would become available within the York Durham sewage system, yes.
Go ahead. Well, then I'll,
Yeah, no, it's just a
just
follow-up.
try to let everybody else.
Yeah, I just wanted
have
to
several
follow up
questions.
on Councilor Wright-Clemente's comments, and I know we've had a bit of debate around here on whether it was a case of the plant actually had to be constructed and operational, or we had to have approval, or the region had to have approval of the environmental assessment for that plant to be constructed to sign off that licensing and for the existing sewage lagoons. And from what I'm hearing, it's, no, it actually has to be constructed. Then in that case, the capacity that was supposed to be set out for the lagoons within the YDSS, has it been spread out already and assigned to the other two municipalities that are in the service area, being Newmarket or Aurora?
Through you, Madam Mayor, no, it has not been. It still stands, and yes, the decommissioning is tied to the commissioning of the Water Reclamation Center, not the approval of the IEA.
So when we do finally get those numbers in June, it should show somewhere where that additional capacity could be, whether it's what we use up the other, to get us to the 7,000, or we get to the 7,000 through the methods which we're trying to implement in this community. There potentially could be more, which was supposed to be carved out for the existing residents that are serviced from the lagoons.
Yeah, through you, Madam Mayor, I wouldn't want to preempt anything that the planning group's doing in terms of that report, but it certainly could be.
Neither would I. I'm just going off of what I understood in the past, and what I thought as Councillor Wright-Clemente had thought that there should be something assigned from that for the lagoons. Because again, we had expected when this YDS was hooked up that the lagoons were going to be decommissioned, which obviously has not. Now we're just waiting a little bit longer as the Upper York takes some more time to move forward. Okay, thank you.
I understood that as well, Councillor Young. I think from the beginning, we understood that when the York Durham system was in place, that the lagoons would be decommissioned, and promised that that was a promise to our community that we have not fulfilled at this point. However, with the Ministry of the Environment insisting that the C of A be a transfer, and it has to be operational, then we still have some capacity. So when I listened today about the delays that we have, it's certainly not new to me. We've heard a lot of it at the region level, and we've shared it back here with our members of council as well. The one thing I wanted to talk about was the twinning main force and why it's important to East Gwillimbury. It's a York region issue. It's in the town of Newmarket, and it deals with Aurora as well. But I wonder if you could just speak for a moment on how important it is for us as well.
Absolutely. Through you, Madam Mayor, I think the force main itself, I mean, it's critical, as I stated before, it's really critical to the growth that's coming in terms of a redundancy piece. Right now, it's a single force main. It has the population of Newmarket, essentially Newmarket and East Gwillimbury on it right now. And any of the growth that's happening is coming through Newmarket, through that force main, through the single force main. So currently, it's very important because there's a lot of added pressure coming with all the development. If anything were to happen to that force main, you're now talking about discharges into the environment, sewage discharges into the environment, and there's obviously a health and environment concern with that happening. So when you have a twin force main, the redundancy allows you to switch back and forth. It allows you to perform proper maintenance. Again, with the flows that are coming right now, there's no opportunity to decommission it and go in and look at it. We can't do any of that work. So we're really looking for that twinning to come so we can start reviewing it. Again, if a discharge happens, it impacts all our environment. So it's related to East Gwillimbury, Newmarket, Aurora. I think we're all impacted by any sort of discharge that happens. So with the growth currently happening right now, it will turn over and start heading north to the Water Reclamation Center. But the impact of all the growth of the Aurora Newmarket area and that pressure onto the system, you're talking about 80,000 new residents across the three. You know, we really needed a twin force main in order to manage the system going forward. So that's why it's imperative for us to move forward with that work.
I know that there was discussions with the ministry at one point that it be separated from the Water Reclamation Center and that it be allowed to move forward on its own merits. Can you bring us up to date on where we are with that as well?
Yes, through you, Madam Mayor. So early in 2017, when we started to hear about these potential delays as it relates to duty to consult, we had gone back to the province and said, look, we understand this and we understand that there are some concerns related to the Water Reclamation Center, but we understand there aren't a lot of concerns with this force main. Everyone agrees that it needs to get constructed. So we have pressured them to you know, advance some sort of separation or provide some sort of mechanism for us to move forward with the force main. Unfortunately, at the provincial level, they weren't able to establish a process or a mechanism or tool for us to have that separation occur. And some of the feedback we got was that we'd probably be better off just to try and advance the entire project together as it is. The time it would require to separate and potentially do a new EA for this force main would take longer than it would to just go forward with the entire project. Now, unfortunately, we're at the end of, beginning of 2018, and you know, the whole project hasn't moved forward in terms of an approval, so we stand to wait. But unfortunately, there's no regulation or way for us to move forward with that separation. So we've been told that it's not really a possibility.
I'm assuming that when Regional Council is back in session, that there'll be discussions about individual municipalities lobbying the province to make that change. I think that first and foremost has to be done. It impacts us all. We work so hard on our environment, and should there be an issue with that, we all will be affected by it for many years to come. So I'm hoping that that's going to be something right away. I had some questions for Ms. Shuttleworth as well, so I'll just wait and see if there's anything else. Okay. Did you have another question?
Just a quick one. Just
Go ahead. Yeah.
The system itself, the YDSS going past Aurora, what does it look like? Is it twinned all the way down, or is there more than just two pipes that can take it all the way through to where it hooks up to the Southeast collector and obviously onto the treatment plant?
So from this point here, so this is the Newmarket Sewage Pumping Station. That's the force main. So there's sewers and there's force mains. There's gravity sewers and force mains. Force mains means they're under pressure.
Yeah.
So you know your water system's under pressure. These pumps are working and they're keeping the sewage under pressure to move it, you know, essentially over any sort of topographical limitations, and then it falls with gravity. So that force main from Newmarket goes all the way to the Aurora Sewage Pumping Station where it hits another elevation that it's got to clear. So Aurora has twin force mains. So those twin force mains are pumped out of Aurora and they go all the way to Bloomington. So they land in Bloomington, and that's where they hit a gravity system. So that's the large York sewage system, the large gravity system that starts to flow by gravity down through Richmond Hill, Markham, and then it eventually reaches our Southeast collector and goes down to the Duffer Creek plant. So that's a big, large gravity system. It's different than the force mains. It's not all twin throughout, but they're not force mains.
And when we were looking, again, the original thought was that we would be serviced to essentially twin the system or add addition to the system. Was that then at that point twinning that gravity fed system that was going to take from that point?
You're absolutely correct. I think initially it was called the Upper Leslie, kind of was potentially going to be a Leslie sewer through the Oak Ridges Moraine. Now, a deep tunnel sewer in this climate and what it would cost, you know, probably closer to $1 billion than what we're actually proposing. It seems like a lot, over $600 million for this solution. So, interesting differential in cost, etc.
No, it's not over till it's over.
Thank you very much. I'm wondering if I could just go back on your presentation, and when we were talking about 40%, 50%, and 60%, I think a lot of people here kind of get it. But if you could go back and talk to us in layman's terms about the intensification, because I think while we're talking about a sewer system with our growth at the other end, these numbers are huge and will make a tremendous difference in the look and feel of East Gwillimbury moving forward.
Certainly, and I'll take you back to what I call our urban structure map for York Region and remind you that under the provincial growth plan for the Great Golden Horseshoe, there are defined areas. So the dark pink is what we define as the already built area. The light pink is the designated greenfield area. And the intensification targets apply to the dark pink. So in the 2006 growth plan, the requirement was by the year 2016 and every year after that, 40% of all new residential development should be on those dark pink lands. So intensification. We're set up very well for intensification in the region because we adopted a centers and corridors urban structure back in 1994, even before the growth plan. So that's where we were, and that's what our regional official plan reflects now. So the new growth plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe now says 50% of all new growth shall be happening in those dark pink areas. And that, but between 2031 and 41, 60% of new growth annually, this is every year, should be happening in those dark pink areas. So the dark pink is defined by what we call the built boundary. That does not change. We thought through the review, the 2016 review of the provincial plans, they might move that built boundary. It is fixed. It stays where it was as defined in 2006. So we did enough analysis through 2014 and 15 to know that we're actually very well positioned as a region to meet those intensification targets. And again, it's because we set up our centers and corridors back in the 1994 regional official plan. We did analysis of a 40% intensification scenario, a 50% intensification scenario, and a no urban expansion scenario back in 15. Now, I don't want to delve into that in detail because we now have a new land budget methodology coming from the province. So we presented to Regional Council a 45% intensification scenario that saw some urban expansion, but it also saw intensification at 45%, which again, we can do easily. We've been doing about, well over 40% for a number of years. I think our average is about 48 for the last 10 years. So I'm not sure, have I answered your question, Madam Mayor?
I think it's important for people to understand that no longer are we going to see any new subdivisions that have estate residential. We're not going to see large lots in communities, and quite often we have people move here and say, well, where I moved from, it was very populated, and we wanted to move to somewhere that had a little more space between the houses, and we will not be able to do that, particularly in 2031 to 2041. We will be looking at higher density that will include several buildings, probably along Green Lane and Yonge areas in particular, that is part of our corridors, that will be 12, 15, maybe 20 stories in height. And that's the only way that East Gwillimbury will be able to meet those targets long term. So, people wonder what the future has in store, and the future has in store not a lot different than we look further south, except for us that when we're fully built out, that green space of about 70% between the Oak Ridges Moraine and the green belt will be there for East Gwillimbury, and in other cases, as you look at the bottom end of the Vaughan, Richmond Hill and Markham, are very limited, and it's all buildings. So I just thought that was really important to make sure that people understood that the challenges going forward, even at 50 and 60%, we're going to see a very different build style than we have even today looking out the back door. Councillor Young.
Thank you. Just on that, Madam Mayor, looking at the built boundary area, and again, the centers and corridors that have been developed in the New York region, fortunately, the larger municipalities have absorbed the 40% or 48%, which you said we were sitting at right now. And we probably, as a municipality, have not contributed a fraction. And I'm wondering at what point does York Region say, when do you start looking at your small area of built boundary and start meeting some targets to help out as we go from 40% to 50% to 60%? I don't think at this point we've contributed much. I haven't seen a lot of redevelopment applications coming in looking at our area of built boundary development. And just before you answer that, I'm looking at the corridor where Green Lane will be, the top of the F, and that looks pink. So that's not within the built boundary, or is it because it's a regional corridor it will be considered? Please.
Through you, Madam Mayor. The dark pink is what we
Yeah.
define as the built-up area. And East Gwillimbury has done some intensification. I saw a new project on Leslie Street under construction as it came up today. We have 9 very different local municipalities, very different contexts, and that's why the targets, whether it's the intensification target or the designated greenfield area target, we do look at them region-wide. The light pink is the designated greenfield areas. Those were the areas that were included in the urban boundary but not yet built in 2006. So right now, the pink area along Green Lane is your ROPA 1 area, as we call it, and it's subject to a density target of 70 residents and jobs combined per hectare. That's the minimum, and that's to help us make up and meet 50 residents and jobs combined over that whole pink area in all of the region. So we are looking to East Gwillimbury, particularly along the Green Lane corridor, to make their contribution on the designated greenfield area density side. And honestly, because of the limited amount of already built up area, to expect, as compared to the amount of designated greenfield area, to expect East Gwillimbury on its own to do 40, 50, 60% is not realistic. But that's why we look region-wide. But we also work with your planning staff to ensure that that there is an intensification strategy, that they are looking at, some main streets, the Leslie Street corridor. Here's a good example we talked about when I was working here. But the focus for East Gwillimbury is on the designated greenfield areas for sure.
Councillor Brady Clemente.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, through you to Ms. Shuttleworth. So we've heard about, we'll call it the dark pink areas and the intensification targets the province has given us there. Can you speak to what those targets are? And I think we touched on it just briefly with Councillor Young's question with respect to the light pink, the designated greenfield area, and what those criteria are, as well as those white belt areas, and what are the criteria for developing those if there's an increased focus on the dark pink. Obviously there are going to be people who own white belt land or who own designated greenfield area who may also want to build within the next 20, 30, 40 years.
So there's 2 parts to that question. So I'm going to talk about the light pink, the designated greenfield area first. And in East Gwillimbury, I should have mentioned it in response to Councillor Young's questions, where as well you have a major transit station area as well. So we'll be looking at that together with you and your planning staff to see what additional densities can be accommodated and how East Gwillimbury in the designated greenfield area can achieve the new designated greenfield area targets. And then we'll look to the 2031 to 40. So I think the provincial idea and the way we're looking at it anyway is that those areas will be any of the white belt that we need to include to accommodate growth to 2041. And so any urban expansion that comes out of this municipal comprehensive review would have to meet that 80 residents and jobs combined per target. Now, we've heard over the last couple of years from many landowners in those white belt areas. And when we presented a 45% intensification scenario to council, there was some urban expansion. And what we proposed in East Gwillimbury at the time was really sort of filling in those gaps between your communities. That was at a 45% intensification target. So now we're looking at a 50% intensification target. So we don't know, again, given sort of the new definitions the province has given us, given we also need to look at adding density at major transit station areas. I don't know, standing here today, if we will need any of those white belt lands to accommodate growth to 2041. I suspect if we do, it's not going to be much, because we have now a 50% intensification target. We also are, in addition to centers and corridors, looking at these major transit station areas to accommodate additional growth. That's where we turn first, and then we look to how much of that growth to 2041 can be accommodated in those areas, and then what's left over to be accommodated through already designated greenfield areas, and then do we need to add land to get us to lands to accommodate growth to 2041.
Thank you very much for being here. For those that don't know, Ms. Shuttleworth has announced her retirement, and we kind of feel a little part of your success along the way, having spent time here in East Gwillimbury before you went to the region. So on behalf of all members of council and all of our residents, we wish you the very best in your retirement and wait to see where you're going to travel to. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr.